The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.
For tonight's meeting, for the May the 10th, first of advisory board meeting, we'll open the floor up with our welcome to our DOE official first, Ms. Wilkerson. Floor yours.
Good evening, everyone. Very grateful to see you all here tonight. As always, we appreciate your time and your commitment to this board. You know, it's a big commitment, so we appreciate time putting into this. We were excited for the members of this board to have an in-person orientation section in April and to get a first-hand look at many of our projects in the field. Nothing really helps understand the work that we do more than being able to see it firsthand. So we are thankful that many of you signed up for that opportunity and encourage all of you to participate again if there's other opportunities in the future. Our crews, as an update, at the Oak Ridge National Laboratories, our crews are making really good progress on cleanup there. One of our top priorities for 2023 is the demolition of the low-intensity test reactor, or Building 3005, in the Central Campus area. That project is underway now, and it is making that area of the laboratory look much different than it did, and providing needed access, public access to the graphite reactor, and also making areas available for potential future reuse by the lab. We also want to make you aware of a couple of opportunities for public comment. Both are about our plans for groundwater cleanup at the East Tennessee Technology Park. One is the topic of our meeting today, and the other one is the topic of the next board meeting. And Roger and the SSAB staff can share more about where to provide comments if you have any comments. We are accepting comments regarding our plans for groundwater cleanup in the ETTP main plant area through May 19th. And we are accepting comments regarding our plans for groundwater cleanup in the K31, K33 area through June 12th. Also at ORNL, we had an event in April celebrating our team hitting the next phase of the Uranium-233 project. That project is eliminating an inventory of legacy nuclear material at the laboratory, and it's helping enable a new cancer treatment technology that is being developed. There were representatives from private companies and the medical research community at that event that talked more about the work that is possible because of the cleanup project at ORNL that they're getting the material from. So that was really nice celebration for us. Finally, since our last meeting, the U.S. Corps of Engineers awarded the contract to build a 25 viewing platform adjacent to the History Center at the East Tennessee Technology Park. They're breaking ground on that facility tomorrow, and we are ready to have that project get underway and is scheduled to be completed next year. So thank you again for your attendance tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Petrie, I know you're presenting tonight. Do you have any comments to start with?
No, thank you.
Our EPA official. Have anyone online for EPA?
Carl Frody is here, but I don't think Samantha is.
Yes. This is Carl Frody. I have no comments, but thank you.
Thank you for joining. TDEC.
Good afternoon. I would like to introduce Heather Lutz. She's our program manager. She's our expert on groundwater issues, working tirelessly with DOE and EPA on groundwater at ETTP. And, I thought that she might be quite a bit more capable, and professional in answering any questions from the board on this topic.
Thank you. So we'll go straight into our presenter tonight. Ms. Amy, would you like to tell us a little bit about Mr. Roger?
Thank you, Leon. Roger Petrie serves as a regulatory affairs specialist and federal facility agreement project manager for DOE Oak Ridge Office Environmental Management. Mr. Petrie brings a unique insight and understanding to the position with more than 25 years of experience for TDEC and the cleanup contractor UCorp. Prior to joining the federal program in 2020, Mr. Petrie provided regulatory support to UCorp, the primary environmental cleanup contractor, leading remediations projects across DOE's Oak Ridge Reservation. During his time with the state, he served as the federal facility agreement project manager for TDEC and worked with counterparts at the Environmental Protection Agency and DOE to facilitate comprehensive environmental response, compensation, and liability act cleanup on the Oak Ridge Reservation. Mr. Petrie began his career in the Aquatic Biology Division of the Tennessee Valley Authority before transitioning to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory Environmental Science Division, conducting research focused on contaminations in fish. Mr. Petrie has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville.
Thank you, Ms. Amy. Mr. Petrie, thank you for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you. So, as Laura mentioned, we're at a very unique place in our cleanup efforts right now. We have finally closed in on hopefully 2 different groundwater rods, both located at ETTP. The first one that is part of the circular process, we have to have approved proposed plans before we go to the rod. We've gotten both proposed plans approved by TDEC and the EPA. The first one we got approved was for what we call the main plant area, and that's what we'll do a presentation on tonight. Shortly after that, we had approval of the proposed plan for the K3133 area. So Laura mentioned that's the one we will present to you next month. So, as I said, this presentation is for the main plant groundwater at ETTP. But what we'll do is we'll go over a brief background of sort of what I just told you, and then we'll cover the cleanup strategy and timeline for the entire reservation and how this fits into that. Then we'll talk about the scope of the proposed plan, evaluate how we evaluated different alternatives. Part of the process is you don't just focus on one alternative. During your process, you look at different alternatives, different ways of doing your cleanup, and you look at different factors for that. We'll go and I'll tell you how we did that. I'll give you a little more detail then about the preferred alternative that we came up with, and then how this fits into the entire ETTP groundwater approach. And then last, I'll very briefly talk to you about what the public input process is into the circular process, and then give you some information about how you do, if you're interested in how you can do comments. So overall, as I mentioned, this is a proposed plan. It's part of the circular process. It's where after we have evaluated several different alternatives, the 3 parties have selected what they believe will be the appropriate cleanup remedy for this particular project. In addition to that, at this point in the process, this is where we go to the public as 3 agencies, and DOE is the lead agency. We do the presentations. When we present to the public, this is the alternative that we came up with. And typically we will explain what the other alternatives were so that everybody has an opportunity to make an informed decision and informed comments. The scope of this particular plan covers 6 areas of groundwater contamination within the plant site, the main plant area. There are a lot more than that, but these are the 6, what we consider the 6 largest and most contaminated ones. And the alternative that we have selected is what we call is enhanced in situ bioremediation. And I'll go into, that's a lot of words to describe something that's fairly simple. I'll try to make it a lot simpler when we describe it. So where does this fit in our overall cleanup? So in 1991, the three parties, EPA, TDEC, and DOE, signed what we call the Federal Facility Agreement. It's an agreement between those three agencies that says this is how we're going to do cleanup on the Oak Ridge Reservation. DOE being the lead agency, we manage that agreement but we have participation by both agencies. We propose schedules. We ask for EPA and TDEC approval of those schedules, things like that. Once that was signed originally, the first thing the early actions that all three agencies decided that needed to be addressed first were areas of contamination that were off the DOE reservation, places where where we had no control over public access to issues. One of the first ones was Lower Watts Bar Reservoir, basically downstream of DOE. Over the decades, DOE there were releases of contamination from the reservation, and some of that is still in the sediments in Watts Bar Reservoir. We went out, we did a remedial investigation, evaluated a remedy, and put that into place. That remedy is basically don't disturb the deep sediments. And we have a program in place with TVA so that when somebody goes to do a disturbance there, they have to apply for a permit. That permit is reviewed by TDEC, EPA, DOE, the Army Corps of Engineers, and TVA. Since most of the sediments it's the sediments in the middle of the channel, down about 30, 40, 50 feet down, there's not many disturbances. The stuff that's on the shoreline where people build their docks is relatively uncontaminated. Yes, ma'am.
What are the contaminants?
The contaminant of concern is cesium-137. And one of the things nice about that is it has a relatively short half-life. So it's decaying away. We're seeing the levels drop because of natural decay. Other actions were taken, some of you may remember this, was the lower East Fork Poplar Creek floodplain right through the middle of town. Thousands of samples were taken, a remediation was selected. This is actually a very good example of why the public involvement is important. EPA, TDEC, and DOE selected a remedy. And we talked a little bit about this our last meeting. Public involvement actually ended up changing that remedy. It was the public involvement actually demonstrated that we were being too conservative, and they demonstrated that a higher cleanup level was more appropriate. Mm-hmm. So that remedy was actually changed because of public input. Once those were done, we then focused on what we call the big watershed rods, Melton Valley, Bethel Valley, Bear Creek Valley, Upper East Fork, and then what we call Zone 1, Zone 2 at ETTP. We broke up the reservation into large chunks and that we have been addressing in each one of those watersheds. Primarily, so in 2000 and roughly about 2000, shortly after, the main focus shifted to ETTP, Zone 1, Zone 2, and the demolition of the gaseous diffusion ducts, which we have told you all about endlessly for the past several decades, which we are now very proud to say they're all gone. Once that was done, once the buildings were gone, next step naturally was to go for the soil underneath those buildings. As you know, those buildings were massive, so couldn't do much with the soils until we got those out of the way. We have now reached a point where we are closing in on completing the soil excavations of contamination. But now it's time to address the groundwater, and that's where we are today, is presenting this proposed plan for what we call the main plant groundwater. This is what the work that we've done at ETTP. Like I said, we've gotten to where we've demolished all the buildings that are needing to be demolished. There are still a few buildings out there. They're all privately owned. Some of those have different futures depending on where they are. But from a CERCLA standpoint, from the cleanup perspective, all of those buildings that are colored green there are now gone. If you've been out there, it is a much different landscape. Now, once those were gone, we began, even before they were all gone, started our civil excavations. And now we are, as we said, the intent is by the end of 2024 is for have all the soil contamination excavated. The approach that we're going to take at ETTP is we've basically broken the site into 3 areas. The one we're going to talk about tonight is inside the dashed line, the green there. It's the main plant area. It's basically what you would think of as the main industrial part of the site. It's where the K-25 building was, K-27, K-29, and then a lot of the support facilities. Some of you who work there will recognize these as 1410, 1420, where the plastic incinerator were, the central corridor where stores, cafeteria, medical, all that were. That's the main plant area. The next area that we now also have a proposed plan for is what we call the K3133 area. That's the one in blue. Purple. It has a different remedy, but we're closing out on that. And I mentioned earlier, we'll give you a presentation on that next month. The other area is what we call Zone 1. You've heard us describe it as the outside of the donut or the non-industrialized part of the facility. There were activities that did occur in Zone 1. At the lower part of that drawing there is an area called Powerhouse. It's where the old steam plant, the old S50 plant were. We used it as a scrap yard for me. There's sorts of areas down there that we will have to address, and there's a burial ground up on the north side that we'll have to address. But for the most part, the groundwater contamination in Zone 1 is much less significant than what is in the main plant area. And you'll talk about that here in a minute. But Zone 1, we are currently working with EPA and TDEC to do the remedial investigation on that. We're putting in wells. We're trying to characterize exactly where the groundwater contamination is, where it's moving, if it is moving, and if it is, where, how deep it is, things like that. So Zone 1's a little bit behind, but we are working on that. So the scope of this proposed plan. So this is we've zoomed in a little bit. This is the main plant. This is the main plant area. It's sort of hard to see because the plume, these yellow blobs and the little finger-like thing in the middle, those are the plumes that we're talking about looking at. Those are covering up the footprints, but you can sort of make out the K25 building footprint there. Pardon?
The yellow.
Yes. Underneath that yellow, you can sort of see there's the concrete pad from the K25 building. The ones where the little boxes are highlighted in yellow, those are the 6 areas. Those are the 6 plumes that we're going to address in this record of decision. The other ones will be addressed in what we will in follow-on decisions. Something to understand, and I'll explain this a little more. This record of decision is what we call an interim record of decision. This is not a final, and there's reasons for that. But understand that what doesn't mean we are done with that water main plant area. It's just this is the first phase of the groundwater remediation. Most of these plumes, as you'll notice in the little boxes, the plumes are named after buildings that were fairly close or right on top of these plumes, typically because contamination in the soils somehow or another was linked to the activities that were in those buildings.
Roger, this is Harold. What are the contaminants of concern for most of the plumes? I know we had a lot of activity for cleaning converters and so forth in the 1401 areas and 1407. I just wondered what organic contaminants are you suspect in those plumes?
While the main purpose of this interim rod is to address volatile organic compounds in these groundwater plumes. The plumes have other constituents, metals and radiological contamination, but the purpose of this rod is to look at primarily TCE, which trichloroethene.
Yeah.
The chemical that, as Harold just pointed out, was used as a degreaser in extraordinarily large volumes at ETTP. Put it in terms that you may be able to relate to, you can go to the auto parts store and you can buy a can of TCEs, maybe about this size. I think it costs maybe $10 or $20. It is an excellent cleaner, the fantastic degreaser. It was used to clean the process equipment and piping because that had to be extremely clean because of the the way the system worked and the uranium hexafluoride that went through the system, if there was any dirt on the inside of the pipe, it would react with that. It caused a variety of problems. So it was very important that these things be clean. These converters and piping were big. I mean, a lot of these were the size of cars. And the best way to clean them was basically they would build vats about the size of this room. They would fill this vat, this size, with TCE. Now remember, you can go to a parts store and buy a jar like this.
Yeah.
DOE bought this by the train load, 5,000 gallon cars and multiples of those. And we use it, and they would dip the equipment in that, it would degrease it. So we used it in very large quantities. You have to remember these facilities were designed and built to last maybe 5 to 10 years. This was the war effort. The idea was once we were done, the war's over. That was what we were shooting for. These facilities stayed in operation for another 1401 stayed in operation until the 70s. So that's
85.
80.
I was going to say 85.
85. So they live way beyond their lifespan. These tanks, these big vats, the concrete eventually cracked. There were leaks. And that's actually one of our main source areas is under 1401. And that's one of the ones we're going to address with this interim record of decision. So I hope that the other thing is a lot of TCE breaks down naturally. And so there are some byproducts of TCE that are in these plumes. The main goal is to address the TCE source.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome. So when we evaluate alternatives, one of the alternatives that we have to evaluate by law is what we call the no action alternative. What would happen if we didn't do anything at all? And it's usually a very short write-up. It's never selected because if you think about it, the reason we're even doing this is because there's an unacceptable risk. So the idea of doing no action it's never accepted, but it has to be included. Our next alternative for this record of decision is what we call in situ thermal treatment. In situ is a fancy way of saying in place. This treatment technology would use large probes, basically, that would be inserted down into the ground, then that would be used to heat up the contaminant. TCE, like I said, is a volatile organic compound. It evaporates relatively easily in the atmosphere. And when you have relatively low concentrations of it, this can be an effective treatment. As we just talked about, our difficulty is we have extraordinarily high concentrations of this material in the soils. The plume that we're just talking about, 1401, the concentration is over 200,000 parts per billion. Just so you know, the cleanup level is 5. So the other reason for this being an interim action is the idea is we don't think we'll hit 5, but we do want to try to get that number down. So the next alternative is what we call in situ bioremediation, in place bioremediation. I'll describe that in a little more detail, but that's the one that we selected. The idea being that if we can reduce the source mass, the total amount down to a certain level, maybe we can come back and do the in situ thermal treatment. We don't know, but we'll have to see how well this works. The third alternative is what was called soil mixing. It is a technology where you go out and you physically mix certain chemicals in with the soil that will help neutralize the TCE. And that, along with enhanced bio into deeper zones, was evaluated. That also was not selected. So please don't try to read all of this. I'm just the eye chart. The main point here is the cost over on the right-hand side. The no action alternative, the first one listed, no action, it doesn't cost anything to implement that. It is important to understand, though, even though it doesn't cost anything to implement, there are costs with not doing it. You have continuing contamination, things like that. You have to still address it at some point. Just under that alternative, the cost is 0. Alternative 1, which was the thermal treatment, heating the system up. The total cost for that was a little over $130 million. That was the cost to the infrastructure to be put in place and then to operate the system. This is over a 5-year period. The preferred alternative, which is the enhanced in situ bioremediation, the cost to implement that and operate it for 5 years is estimated to be about $32 million, roughly $100 million cheaper than the first one. And then the third alternative, which is a combination of the soil mixing and then the in situ bioremediation, its estimated cost was $167 or more. So, gives you an idea of that. That's one of the, and the reason I bring that up is because each alternative has to be compared to what we call the circle of decision criteria. And there are 9 of those. So we take each one of those remedies and we compare it to these criteria. The first 2 criteria are what we call threshold. Think of it this way. These 2 criteria are yes, no questions. There's no well, sort of, or maybe. You have to meet these. If you don't say yes to these 2 criteria, it gets kicked out. First one is it has to be protective of human health and the environment. If you're doing, the reason we're doing a remedy is because there's a risk to human health and or the environment there. So no reason to go out and implement a remedy if you're going to end up in the same place. So that one you have to say yes to. The second is a lot of words to say compliance with applicable or relevant and appropriate requirement. It's a nice way of saying we have to obey the law. There's standards, there's regulations, there's laws. This is how it has to be in the end. So you have to say we have to meet that one. The next 5 are what we call balancing criteria. These are ones where you get to go, well, yeah, sort of, or maybe this one's more of this one's less of this. You look at things such as the long-term effectiveness and the permanence of the remedy. Maybe I was explaining in this case, the long-term effectiveness, we're really not sure. We're not sure how effective this one that we've selected would be in the long term against the others. Like I said, at these high concentrations, thermal has issues. So that's one of the things we look at. The other one is the reduction of toxicity, mobility, and volume through treatment. As I mentioned, one thing we like about the bio is there's a good chance that we may be able to significantly decrease the source mass, the amount that's there. We're probably still not going to get down to 5, but we're going to try to get as close as we can. Short-term effectiveness. Some of these remedies may take a very long time to prove effective. So over the short term, you may not see anything. But if you get to where you need to be after 10 years or 15, maybe that you're willing to give up a little bit of your short-term effectiveness. Next is the ability to implement. Theoretically, there's a lot of remedies out there. They work you do them on a bench in a laboratory, they work great. But when you implement them full scale out in the field in the real world, some of them don't work at all. So you have to look at, is this something that we can implement on the scale that we need? And then the 5th one is cost, like we just demonstrated. While you may have 2 remedies that both may over a 10-year period prove effective, one's 167 million and one's 32 million. As stewards of your tax dollars, we're probably going to choose the 32 million one. So that feeds into it. The last 2 criteria are what we call modifying criteria. This goes to what we were talking about with the floodplain decision, where public input actually changes things and input from the state. The first is state acceptance. There is a part of I think in your packet, there is a copy of the actual proposed plan. In that proposed plan, there's a section there addressing state acceptance. That's because of the way circle of law is written. There's a requirement that the state have input into a decision that's made between DOE and EPA. The last there is community acceptance. What do you all think of the remedy? As I mentioned, we had one of our earliest remedies was changed because of public input. So if you have thoughts, we want to hear that. So in a conceptual idea, this is actually there are very technical issues associated with this, but I will try to explain this in ways I hope that most people will come away with an understanding of this. Enhanced in situ bioremediation. Bioremediation is where you have natural microorganisms that are already present in the soil, bacteria, that actually will eat and consume the contaminant, TCE. The thing is, there aren't enough of them in the soil right now to really reduce the mass very much. So the in situ is in place. This is where we're going to treat the contamination where it is. Bioremediation is we're going to do something with the bugs to help them digest the TCE. The enhanced part is what is really the sort of the part that helps us get to where we need to be. What we do is, this gives you an idea of how it works. We will drill wells down into the middle of the source areas. And in those wells, we will inject substances down in there that will basically, for lack of a better word, fertilize the bacteria, keep them, cause them to grow and reproduce and to get a higher number of them so that they will then digest the TCE and break it down into less toxic materials. Important thing to understand is what we call this remedy will meet the statutory requirements of it. It meets the protection of human health and the environment. And I'll go into that here in a minute. It's cost effective, as we demonstrated. It's not the most expensive, it's not the cheapest, but it is what we feel is a good use of taxpayers' dollars. It satisfies the statutory preference for permanent solutions through treatment. If you have the option and you can demonstrate that it's the better alternative, then treatment through active processes is preferred. It's not always the one that's chosen because sometimes it is not the most, it doesn't fall out in the same place when you compare it to the circular criteria. When we do the presentation next month, we'll go into that a little more. It meets all the requirements, as I said, for protection of human health and the environment. The one that we do have to get a waiver for what's called the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's because, as I mentioned earlier, 5 is the level, the remediation level. We won't be able to.
Drinking water.
Yes. We won't be able to achieve that. So the way we achieve overall protection of human health and the environment is under under an interim ROD, is we put in land use controls that say you cannot use the groundwater while we're doing this. Mm-hmm. So we waive the requirement to meet drinking water, but to meet the protections, we say you can't use the drinking water. You can't use the groundwater for drinking water purposes. So we're only allowed to do that under an interim ROD. If this were a final ROD, your final goal, what you have to do, you can't waive that statement. And then last is our goal is, if everything works the way we plan, that the levels will drop down below 1,000 parts per billion. So really, if this is effective as we intend it to be, we'll go from about 200,000 to less than 1,000, and maybe then be able to implement other alternatives such as thermal or other treatments that may get us down to where we need eventually. Every record decision has to have what we call remedial action objectives. These are your goals. What are you trying to achieve? Here, like we said, trying to reduce the amount of fluorinated volatile organic compounds, fancy word for saying the TCE, down to levels that provide the greatest human health risk reduction. Groundwater plumes addressed in the interim are where we have the greatest concentrations. We showed you that map. So the biggest plumes are the ones we're addressing. Then the interim remedial action objectives is to really reduce that mass through the whole area. And then last, as I mentioned, objective is to get us down to below 1,000 parts per billion. So the way this will work is we will work with EPA and TEC to come up with a design, which will involve putting in wells, and where those wells will go. And then in those wells, we'll use those to inject what we call a carbon substrate. It's a very fancy way of saying vegetable oil. Corn oil. I know it sounds strange, but by doing this, this is a proven technology, has worked on many plumes. Not sure we ever tried it on plumes that have TCE at this level. We're going to give it a shot. And you inject that down into the ground, into the area around the plumes. The microbes then, as we talked about, will consume this, and that they like the eating the corn oil. And so then you get enough of them, they then also begin to digest these, the contaminants TCE, and break it down into, eventually they'll break it down to ethane, and which is relatively harmless and will disperse much easier. And what we'll have to do with TDEC and the EPA is decide on first the location of the wells, the frequency of these injections. Is one injection enough, or are we going to have to do multiple? When we do multiple, how frequently are those going to have to be? Is we're going to do one every year, one every 2 years, every 3, 4 years? How often do we monitor? And then the other thing is once we've done this, how do we determine whether we've been successful? As we said, the objective is to get down to 1,000. But if we get down to 2,000, have we been successful at least in this, implementing this remedy?
The basic thing, Roger, is it's a proven technology. We've done it in the past by using microorganisms for calcium compounds that had organic materials, and it will work. And you don't have to worry about the microorganisms dying as long as you have the vegetable oil or something like that. Everything is preserved.
Yes.
And the organic material is gone.
It is reduced into less harmful components.
And that was exactly my question, Harold.
If I can, for a point of order, let's have Mr. Petrie finish his presentation, then we'll open the floor for any questions or answers. Mr. Petrie, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. So this is the 1400 area plume, 1401 plume. I'm not saying this is the way it will be done, but this is a way that to give you an idea of how this may be implemented. Part of the plume is the dark area there. The little dots could possibly be where the wells would be located. There may be more, there may be fewer. That's something we'll have to work out. The wells may be at differing depths. Some of them may just go down through the top, the soil layers. Some of them may go down into cold weathered bedrock. And then there may be some that we may elect to send all the way down into the consolidated bedrock, the stuff that's not even broken up yet. And then we'll inject the substrate, the vegetable oil down into there. Harold Taylor did mention, we've actually on the reservation, we did try this over at Ornell with ARRA funding. If everybody remembers that, there was a small scale demonstration project we did over there. It was very successful in significantly reducing the mass of the contaminant in the area that we injected it. This technology has also been used across the country by both private industry and other government agencies. The Department of Defense has used this on some of their areas. But that gives you an idea of how each plume would be addressed. We'll have to come up with something like this for each of those. So after we get done, if you are interested and you would like to give comments on this proposed plan or any aspect of this project, this is not just a proposed plan. There's been a whole series of documentation leading to this. There was a RIFS, then there was a focus feasibility study, then there were drafts of the proposed plan. Any of that you wish to comment on, you're more than welcome to. Any comments that you send in will be captured verbatim, either if you send them in through mail to the address shown, or you can send them through email to that email address. They will be captured verbatim, and they will be responded to in the in the record of decision. There's a part of the record of decision. It's called the responsiveness. We are required to list every comment that we receive verbatim in there and prepare a response. Understand that not every comment may not be related to this project. And so the response may be, thank you for your comment. It's not related to what we're talking about. Or we do receive a lot of technical comments sometimes, and they may be valid, but there may be a reason why we didn't select to do that, and we'll provide a response to that. We also count comments. If all you want to say is you agree or you disagree, we will take those comments and they will be put into the response to the summary also. As Laura pointed out, the comment period started on April 5th and will end on May 19th. So if you wish to have your comments taken into account for the record of the decision, you need to think about trying to maybe get them in by that time. If you would like to get a copy of the proposed plan, if you have your phone, you can scan that QR code and it will take you to the information center and actually give you the link to download a copy. It's also in your packet, by the way.
Yes.
I think we already have one. And just quickly, we've already talked about this. As we mentioned, the proposed plan for the K3133 area is out. Do a presentation like this next week or next month on that. We also welcome your comments on that too. So if you do email or send your comments, please designate which ones you're commenting on, because K3133 or the main plan. So, I'll leave that there. And now,
thank you, Mr. Petrie, for your presentation. So we'll open the floor to the board members internally here in the room. And then we'll go, after we clear this room, we'll go to the online. If you will, please raise your hand. I may have to get Miss Shelley or someone to help me read some of the smaller print names. We'll open the floor, number one, to Ms. Shoemaker. Ms. Shoemaker, you have the floor.
One of my questions, and you have pretty well answered it, was, has there been a precedent set for it? Have there been other projects like this? Of course, probably not near on this scale, but
not on the reservation. The one project on the reservation was the one at Ornell. It was a much smaller plume. It was on the east end of the plant site, but it was a TC. I believe it was TC. It was a volatile organic VOC plume. And as we said, it was a pilot study that we executed with ARRA funding. It's the same thing though. It was injecting corn oil into wells.
So
it was a very shallow plume.
So has it been done in industrial sites or military sites?
My understanding is, that there are Department of Defense sites, I believe Air Force bases, that have used this technology. Although their plumes themselves were larger in area, but lower in concentration. Without getting overly, I don't want us to go down a rabbit hole about chemical properties and whatnot, but when TCE occurs in really high concentrations in groundwater, it becomes what we call a DNAPL, a dense, non-aqueous phase liquid. Its physical properties actually, it coalesces into such a high concentration, its physical properties sort of change. And instead of being this nice light chemical that rises, it becomes dense. And it actually begins to sink. And that is a problem when you're putting wells in, because if you put the well in through it, you actually are creating, you have the ability to create a drain for it to go deeper. One of the things, it doesn't always happen, but it is one of the things we have to take into account. And it goes back to those criteria that we evaluate. It's not only do you have to make sure that you're doing something helpful, but you also want to make sure that you're not going to do something that's going to make the situation worse. And that's those balancing criteria that we have.
And that was my other question. We've been through this before, and I know that's been my argument for years. Your Safe Drinking Water Act is your criteria.
Yes.
The water quality criteria is much lower. And you're affecting Metro Branch, which is a zero flow stream.
Some of the groundwater does eventually migrate to Mitchell Branch and discharge into Mitchell Branch, correct?
And, a lot of people don't realize that water quality criteria is much lower than
So, for some contaminants, yes, that is true. And while we do detect there are contaminants in Mitchell Branch, until we address the groundwater sources, it's difficult to determine what the impact of the contaminants on Mitchell Branch are, because there are also storm drains that discharge to Mitchell Branch. It is a very low flow stream.
Yeah.
It's been the recipient of a lot of discharges over the years.
And it was my baby for
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And so that's my other question. There was a classified burial ground.
And so there are several classified.
Well, have those been remediated?
1070B has been remediated. That was done with ERA funding. It was excavated and then backfilled. That one, though, it's important to understand all the classified burial grounds, whether they've been remediated or not, will be main DOE property to be for security reasons. The 1070CD burial grounds have not yet been remediated. There are areas within it that have. There was the project called G-Pit excavation that occurred around 2000. That was a limited, very small area that was evaluated and excavated. We have done characterization in there. Characterization that we have conducted to date does not indicate that there are specific identified sources to groundwater. What we do know is that there are groundwater plumes that appear to originate in that area.
Yes, and there's a spring.
Yes.
Yes.
It is a challenge to do work in those areas because everything inside the fence is classified, which means all workers who work in there have to have Q clearances. Finding well drillers that have that can get and keep a Q clearance has been challenging. And as many of you know, despite everything that we do, all the work we do, in the end, security rules. And if they say you're not going to do something, then we have to back up and find a different way to do it. And that's sort of where we are right now, 1070 CD.
So you have to consider remediating that first prior to
as I said, the characterization data that we have today has not identified any specific source area within the burial ground, so we're not sure what we do. But there, as I mentioned, there appear to be plumes that may originate underneath there, and that will be a future decision that we have to come to with EPA and TDAS.
And they go to Mitchell Branch. Eventually.
That's classic. Yeah, well, actually, some of the stuff that comes out of 1070 CD probably goes to the front side of the site, goes to the P1 pond.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's my.
Fascinated by the organisms.
Yes.
So if the oil is to basically give them food, cannot these organisms be replicated, bred, whatever the term is, in an artificial situation? And would more of them more quickly into the area of remediation not be more beneficial? I'm asking, why would you not just grow more of them and put more of them in, or can you not reproduce them?
And we have just jumped beyond my realm of knowledge. Heather, can maybe that's even to him. That's Sam Shepler, one of our groundwater folks with him. Or Aaron.
Steve, so we know that the mics will hit you.
Now you're in a circle.
There are technologies out there.
Can you
where-
introduce yourself?
I'm sorry. I'm Erin Sutton. I'm the new Dave Adler.
Oh. Fruit. I know, Dave.
So anyway, there are technologies out there where, they will introduce different critters out there. And one of the products is called biocritters. So yes, if the microorganisms do not exist in the subsurface, you can add them. I believe here we already have a colony, a population down there that I think if we nurture it, it'll take care of it.
Okay, so more would not achieve it faster necessarily.
I think we want to keep with the species and
Thank you.
the native.
Native, there you go.
In a colony of whatever they are.
Mr. Bartholomew.
I see on this chart, there's a initial treatment area, square feet. Is that surface area of the above on grade?
If you measure it, if you took that map and you did a surface calculation of the area that's in you, it gets you pretty close to what that.
Is there any information on a gallon, how big of an area as far as gallons or thousands of gallon volume? Yeah.
No. We have tried to do a historical evaluation of how much TCE was used. You have to understand that for a very long time, there was a different priority about record keeping. And, there are actually very good records about how much was bought, what happened to all of that. That for a very long time, that wasn't very important. For instance, the area I described to you earlier, GPIT, what GPIT was a hole in the ground. And what they would do is they would take TCE and you pour it into the hole. That was the accepted, approved method of disposal for many years. And then you come back the next day and the hole's in. And that they did that for a very long time. And there were think about this, there's GPIT. Well, there was also A pit, B pit, C pit, D pit, E pit, F pit. I think there were ones beyond G pit. There were a lot of pits and a lot of trenches, and that was the accepted method. It's not real clear how much was disposed in any one pit. So I can't really give you a good number as to how much was disposed of. The plume in the 1401 area, we did a characterization of that 10 years ago, I think it was. We sunk roughly, it's one of the ones we drove by. We're roughly in a very small area. We put in approximately 100 wells, and these were screened at different levels, and we did lots of sampling. And based on the results of that, we were able to actually generate a 3D model of what that plume looks like, where the highest concentrations are. It looks like a big blob. It's a 3D blob underground. That gave us a lot of good information about that one. That project costs about $40 to $50 million just to do that characterization. So it gave us good information. It's not a very practical approach to doing the remediation for the entire site. As you can imagine, $40 million per just these 6, that'd be $240 million. Go ahead and take this approach for about $30 million.
As you inject, you worry, I guess you got to have wells big enough that you can see if you're moving the plume as you inject.
That is one of the concerns, is that, as you inject volume down into it. Yes. And then one of the issues with thermal is that there's evidence that if you use it, if it's not done correctly, that can actually cause expansion of the plume. Instead of just evaporating it straight up, it actually can, there are cases where it's been demonstrated, it moves it laterally. So all of these things have to be, we will work with TDEC and EPA during the remedial design phase to try to address these issues to make sure that, again, that we're not going to end up making the situation worse while trying to, in an effort to make it better. Ms. Butler.
Back
to the microorganisms, I'm just wondering, do we know what happens to them after they ingest all this TCE? I mean, do they just get bigger, or is there a risk that they could mutate into the next pandemic? Do we know? Does anybody know?
I don't think these will. I don't think we're going to see the zombie apocalypse. One of the concerns is that TCE. There are concerns about the microbes in that. In a situation like this, where you have such high levels of TCE, that the TCE itself may not only, while it may be a food source, it may also prove to be toxic at these high concentrations. We don't know. That is one of the things we'll evaluate. You know, we may feed them and they may start munching on it and they eat so much that I don't know. We'll have to. That's one of the things, again, we have to work out. You heard earlier about we have to find ways to evaluate how successful the project will be. And that's one of the things we'll have to look at.
Yes, you might.
Well, I just want to say that, Roger, you've done a very good job of explaining the magnitude of the problem. It's a very huge problem. And I think what DOE is doing is the best approach. I think y'all did a great job. You know, we just hope for the best, because we never faced it.
I would like to say that, you know, we didn't come up with this remedy overnight.
Yes.
This is the result of quite literally years and years of effort by all three parties to evaluate these different alternatives and come to a selection of this one just as the interim. I mean, once we're done here, we still have to move on to final decisions about what we're going to do with the ground. So,
Mr. Turner.
We keep hammering back on the organism that's doing the job. And you're referring to them as microorganisms. Are these bacteria? Are they bacilli? Are they cocci? Or are they, amoeba-like things?
Amoebas?
Yeah, or one-celled organisms. That is, are they bacteria? Are they?
They are one-cell organisms.
So
I don't know what kind of bacteria they are.
So, well, there are a lot of one-celled organisms that are not bacteria. So I'm thinking, so they are bacteria?
My understanding is they are bacteria.
You're nodding.
It's about as far as I can go with that one. I'm a geologist, so.
Yeah,
Probably anaerobic if they're under.
yeah, I'm thinking they may be anaerobic bacteria, but I'm not even sure of that. Yeah.
Oxygen. So, yeah.
I will find out.
Yeah, I started to say, are there some microbiologists in the room?
A lot of microbiologists did work in a microbiology lab at one point.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an anaerobic process, the degradation of TCE.
Yeah.
And eventually, I believe it goes past ethene to carbon dioxide, maybe carbon monoxide, all the way through that chain.
Done by?
Bacteria.
So a bacteria, but you don't know cocci or bacillus or spiral.
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. I guess you don't go down.
We'll have science class next month.
Okay. I'm just wondering in terms of, how readily available or how knowledgeable we are about what we're working with.
Yeah, I just wanted to know a little bit the geography. So we cannot consider this underground water as a closed vessel. It's not a closed system. It has some interaction with nearby lakes or creeks, or like Bonnie said, was a Mitchell branch, right? So I would like to understand where geographically is this located? I mean, I know where ETTP is, but where is Mitchell branch, for example? So that impacts Oak Ridge at some point?
Well, it doesn't impact the residential area of Oak Ridge. I mean, you have to understand all of this is in Oak Ridge. It's all parts of it within the city limits. Mitchell Branch discharges into Poplar Creek, which is this. It's the. See if I can.
It's probably the best the display.
Yeah, that's that one.
Oh, very small.
It is a very small. So Mitchell Branch You see where it says main plant? Oh, here we go. Yeah, right there where the little hand is. There's a very small creek that runs right there and discharges into Poplar Creek, which is this stream that runs right through the middle of the site. And then that discharges into the Clinch River, which is this larger body of water right here. Also, this is actually a Wasbar Reservoir, technically.
I know this bar.
Yes. Eventually discharges the Wasbar.
Okay. The other thing was, well, I mean, you said that the byproduct eventually after the digesting by the bacteria.
Yeah, and as Sam pointed out, it breaks down to carbon dioxide.
Yes. Yeah, I was trying to figure out if there's any impact in like the greenhouse effect, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
Versus CO2 will be different.
Right. Yeah. I don't know about at the magnitude that it would be degraded in this scenario.
$100,000.
But it will be the CO2
That's correct. Yeah, it's through involve final chloride, right? And then pass that to CO2.
Thank you. Yes.
Any other questions from the board members? Anyone online? Please raise your hand.
Mr. Connor has a question.
Yes, go ahead. Your question.
Yeah, my question is, I agree with that treatment alternative. I think it ultimately will work to some extent. I guess my question is, what if you don't reach the levels that we are hopeful of reaching? What happens next?
There are, under EPA guidance, there are other alternatives, there are other active treatments that we may be able to attempt. As I said, even though we may not get it down to 1,000, if we get it down to a certain level, we may be able to implement the thermal treatment. That may be a doable one.
Yeah.
There's that soil mixing, that may be a possibility. If we get it down low enough, the other alternative is there's a remedy selection called monitored natural attenuation. If we can demonstrate that even without active treatment, that the levels are dropping at a rate that is a vague term, but it's what's considered to be a reasonable rate to get down to the drinking water levels, then we can call that the remedy. And then finally, if nothing seems to work, there is what's called a technical impracticability waiver. And it is where, at least for the time being, no remedy is put in place. We put in land use controls prohibiting use of groundwater, which I think it's important to understand DOE does that anyway.
That's going to be,
whether we have a remedy in place or not. When we transfer property, that goes in place. And you continue to monitor your groundwater to make sure you know where it is and where it's going. But, you know, if you demonstrate that no other technology has worked and that even, you know, at some point the levels are not dropping, if you demonstrate that it's not moving and not going anywhere, then under EPA guides, you can apply for what's called a TI waiver.
Okay.
Just at least for the time being, until something better comes along.
Yeah, that was my point. What other alternatives may be used to augment the bioremediation to assist? You know, the pump and treat, or some heating by injection, or you may get the level down lower that another alternative may work well cheaply.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just going to inject that this is the interim. Oh, sorry. I'm Heather Lutz. This is the interim IROG. So we're just working to address those first 6 sources of the high CVOCs, the chlorinated solvents. Again, with the bacteria that's in the anaerobic is the D-haliocoides DHC. It's very common in industry to use this for cleanup in this area. So it absolutely will, we believe, will handle those VOCs. in the way that they need to. And then this moves into the final rod or some next phase of it, because this is only addressing 6 of all of the plumes that are out there. We still have more plumes. We still have more contamination in metals and radioactive materials, which will continue to be addressed in those follow-on rods. And that's, I think, where the gentleman who was just speaking is talking about those treatment trains. What are we going to do after that? This is the first step to hit those acute source areas, and then we'll move forward in the rest of that treatment train. I'm ultimately looking for safe drinking water, cleanup levels for groundwater. There's a water in the state and the NCP requirements.
Thanks.
Any other questions online or in the room?
In the room.
Go to guest.
Roger, for the plumes that are co-contaminated with metals and nuclide, particularly technetium, is there any, if you look at what it might do to those things making it more mobile?
One of the follow-on actions will be to evaluate, as Heather mentioned, evaluate some of these other plumes. One of the plumes that we will need to look at is the what's called the Tech 99 plume. It originates under the east wing of the.
Do we have co-contaminated plumes? I'm talking.
Yes. Yes, there are.
You better be careful with the technetium in there.
Mm-hmm.
Maintain reducing atmosphere so that stay mobile.
The technetium has 2 qualities. One, first is it's one of the good things about technetium is it's very water soluble. It moves with the water very easily. The bad part is it is very water soluble very easily. Some of the initial data that we've got from monitoring the TCE plume is that we believe that it's already starting to decline and move with the groundwater flow. It also takes Tech 99. Lots of T's and lots of C's.
Yeah.
The Tech 99 plumes already beginning, we believe, to decrease. And that's something we'll work out with TDEC and EPA is how to evaluate that and what the remedy for that one should be. It also takes a lot of Tech 99 to comparatively to get up to a level where it's above drinking water standards. It is above drinking water standards in the heart of the plume right now. But again, it may decrease over time. We don't know. We'll have to watch it more. We'll come to a remedy selection on that our next phase.
One more, if I will. How much of the groundwater contamination was the result of demolition as opposed to legacy operations?
Hard to say exactly how much. I would say that yes, the Tech 99 plume is probably primarily occurred primarily because of the demolition of the K25 building.
And that was because the method was changed due to safety, right, in the middle of the project, right?
There were issues when we were doing the demolition, yes. It wasn't a change so much, though. It was a more effective demolition approach.
Well, there was an accident, though. There was an accident, though, in I think the approach to demolition changed after that accident, did it not?
Oh, you're talking about the gentleman who fell through the operations board. Yes.
Yeah.
During the initial phases of the K25 project, one of the workers, it related to the fact that we had not maintained the building in a safe configuration. He fell through the upper operation board and fell down through the pipe gallery and down to the production floor about 40, I think it was 40 feet or so. He was extremely fortunate in that he didn't, I know it sounds really big, he broke his leg and I think he broke some ribs. Given how far he fell, broke his arm. That was extraordinarily fortunate. It did cause the project to come to a stop. We had to reevaluate having workers in the facility. It caused us to actually have to go in and reconstruct the building in certain ways so that it was safe enough for them to be in. So we had to build the building up, tore it down. It was a very valuable lesson learned for us. We expend funding to maintain our older buildings so that they're at least in safe enough configuration for workers to be in. But yes, that changed significantly the demolition approach. I would not say, I'm not sure you could say that was the reason for the Tech 99 release. It's just, but that obviously did contribute to changes in the way we did work.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Rudy.
Rudy, I'm a former committee member. I live in Oak Ridge. I can tell by the look on some of your faces when Roger specifically said trying to get Q-cleared heavy equipment operator or a well driller to go in there. Some of you that have never worked out there or lived with someone that's worked out there, they just tell you what the training is. You might want to write this down so you have it. You got 40-hour HAZWOPER training. Okay. Then you have site-specific HAZWOPER training. Based upon your job, you may have, well, you have to have RAD Worker 2, Radiation Worker 2 training. Not only do you have classrooms that you have to pass the end test, you have to pass dress out. And there are people that don't pass it, and they got to come back and try it all over again. You might have confined space training. You may have fall protection training. You may have, did I say hot work permit?
No, yes.
Hot work, and then that's just the initial. Then you have to go back every year to get trained over again. And the whole time, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, these people are already on the clock for the people that they're going to work with. They get them from the hall. So as soon as they go out there and sign in, guess what? They're getting paid while they're sitting in class training. And this is every person based upon where they go and what they do. And like I say, if you don't pass, you got to go through the training all over, or you go back to the hall.
And you also have to have Q clearance.
Oh, I'm sorry. Q clearance. It took me 2 years to get a Q clearance once I got here and started working out there with my previous top secret security clearance with escort. And I said, nope, that's no good. You got to start all over. So that's, and if you got away from a Q clearance, you're SOL.
Mr. Petrie, thank you for your presentation and your staff joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Good job.
Appreciate your involvement. Thank you. Ms. Shelley, any public comment?
We do have a public comment.
Mr. Lewis.
Okay, I'm Luther Gibson. I was a member of the Oak Ridge Site Specific Advisory Board from 1999 to 2005, board chair in 2001 and 2002. Retired DOE contract employee since 2017 with over 40 years experience and currently vice president of the Coalition of Oak Ridge retired employees. The draft recommendation on the FY25 Oak Ridge Environmental Management Budget program budget priorities is essentially a rubber stamp of DOE's program plan for executing projects with a comment about inflation. It lacks mention of at least 3 important activities that should be included from a broader community stakeholder perspective. First one, continue support to the state of Tennessee for conducting annual oversight, monitoring, and reporting. Continue activities by the Site-Specific Advisory Board sponsored by DOEN to assist the public in participation activities and outreach assistance. And then finally, fully fund contractor liabilities associated with post-retirement life, medical benefits, and pensions. There was a record of discussions surrounding the latter issue going back as far as or further to 2008 when the oversight recommendation on the FY 2010 budget priorities was prepared. Summarize the history would take time not allotted this evening that could very be used to inform the discussion with new information. Annual funding notices for the DOE contractor pension plans for 2022 were just reported. The funding target attainment percentage for the plan sponsored by Consolidated Nuclear Security at Y12 is 114.16%. Pension plan for employees at ORNL is at 96.53%, but would be above 100% if a portion of the total assets were not being retained as a pre-funding balance. Savannah River Nuclear Solutions LLC multiple employer pension plan is 113.25%, after being 80.85% only as recently as 2019. On the other hand, the Oak Ridge Reservation Cleanup Contract Pension Plan for grandfathered employees is at 86.81% and has been consistently underfunded since 2008 financial crisis. Underfunding does not mean that pensioners are not receiving the benefits promised when they retired, but does pose a situation that requires attention and a plan to resolve. There's no harm to highlighting this issue as a bullet in the recommendation, as I have suggested. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Luther. Any calls for additions or a motion to approve the agenda? Have a motion on the floor.
Motion to approve.
Motion, Mr. McCurdy, second by Ms. Shoemaker. All those in favor, raise your hand. Online, please raise your hand. Ms. Shelley, take a vote. I think it passes unanimously. So the request for the new items, and the next meeting will be June the 14th to discuss a proposed plan for the K31-33 area groundwater. This concludes our presentation. Anyone would like to go ahead and step out? Thank you for attending. We'll start our board meeting here. We'll go straight into board business. We have a couple of target items here under A and B that we need to vote on our previous minutes. We have a motion on the floor. We'll go with agenda item number A first. AA, meeting minutes for February the 8th, 2023. We have a motion on the floor.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion by Jones. Have a second on the floor. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion carried. Any opposed, but like sign. Agenda item B, minutes for the March 8th, 2023 meeting. We have a motion.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Jones. Have a second. Motion by Ms. Butler. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed. Go to the discussion and a vote on the budget recommendation that you should have in your packet in question, or the entertainment for a motion to approve or deny.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Have a motion on the floor to approve by Jones, second.
Second.
Motion second by Curdy. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, no like sign. Agenda item number C, discussion and vote on the chair's recommendation. The chair's recommendation is in your packet. No allowable edits or amendments to it, so we have to vote on as presented. Do we hear a motion to approve or deny?
Approve.
Have a motion by Shoemaker, second.
Second.
Second by Butler. All those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, no like sign. Going through that pretty quick, aren't we? Response to the recommendation, did he hit? Ms. Noah, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Leon. I just want to let you know really quickly that we've made our initial selections for new members for our next go round. We're in the process of getting it submitted for the preliminary review. As you all know, there's a very long process, and now headquarters has added this preliminary review before we can start the actual. So, but they tell us it's going to go faster by doing this. Also, we're in the middle of planning for the chairs meeting. This is going to be where we host the big chairs meeting where everybody comes to Oak Ridge. That'll be the first week of October. So stay tuned. We'll be having more information. It's an excellent way for members who don't normally get to travel to the chairs meeting to be able to participate and see what happens at that. So we'll keep
Where will that be held?
I'm sorry, it'll be here in Oak Ridge.
I mean, but where?
Doubletree. The Doubletree.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the only place here in Oak Ridge that's big enough to accommodate their stuff. And we get slapped on the hands if we go outside of Oak Ridge. But there will also, we always do, as part of this, a tour of the reservation, an overview. So for anybody who hasn't seen that, stay tuned because you may want to be included on that tour just to get another look at the site. So, and that's all I have. Thank you, Leon.
Thank you so much. Mr. Sharp, presentation on EM. Michael, you with us?
Yeah, nothing, no update from me at this moment.
Thank you so much. Next meeting will be May the 24th, and that'll be a continued discussion on the main plant for the groundwater remedies. We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you all for attending.
Thank all of you.
Thank you, Harold. Take care.
See ya.